Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Mr. American's Moments in Geography. So we are going to continue talking about our Andean countries, so that we are connecting with Andes Mountains in South America. And in particular today, we're going to look at Bolivia and Chile. Quick fact, at 12,000 feet above sea level, La Paz, which is the administrative capital of Bolivia, Bolivia has two capital cities. It's actually the highest capital elevation-wise in the world. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. But let's get into Bolivia and Chile, and let's start with Bolivia. So Bolivia can be best described using three words: landlocked, highest, and isolated. Let's talk about these three. So landlocked means that it is a nation that is not bordered by a sea or an ocean. And actually being landlocked or completely surrounded by land can add to a country's isolation because it becomes a little bit more difficult for them to trade. We're going to talk about how Bolivia is trying to deal with that fact a little bit later. It's also the highest overall nation as far as elevation goes in all of Latin America. So the Andes, like we've talked about, they have been our common theme throughout this unit. They dominate the landscape here in Bolivia, and they surround what is called the Altiplano, which is the high plateau. And this is where most Bolivians live. They live right on the Altiplano. And I'm going to show you guys what this looks like here. So if you're following along with the map, you can see the Andes Mountains here along the west. Again, we have the Pacific Ocean on our coast here. The Altiplano, which if we're in Bolivia here, this is where most people live. Okay, and so certainly you're going to have some people, but very few living in the Andes. Most people are going to live here on this high plateau, this Altiplano. Now, remember when we were talking about how Bolivia was isolated? Well, Peru in the year 1993 attempted to help Bolivia by allowing the city of Ilno to become a port city for free trade, so that Bolivia could become a little bit more connected with Peru and also other nations because of the fact that it's landlocked and it's isolated. So where the potential really lies for Bolivia is in its mining. Keep in mind that poverty, or people who don't have the means in which to cover a lot of their basic necessities, or they're just able to cover those basic necessities. That makes up about 2 out of every 3 people in the nation of Bolivia. However, I want you to consider this. So the Salar de Uyuni, which I apologize if I have mispronounced, or the Uyuni Salt Lake, has attracted a lot of attention lately because it's very rich in lithium. Now, if that sounds familiar to you, if you have a cell phone, more than likely you have what's called a lithium battery inside of it. It's also in a lot of electronics and has the potential to become really important for our future in transportation, because it could be very valuable for making batteries for hybrid cars as well as electric cars. So Bolivia's Uyuni Salt Lake, it's believed to hold about half of the world's total reserves of lithium, which again in the future could be very important. Bolivia, like we mentioned at the beginning of our video, has 2 capital cities, La Paz as well as Sucre. So La Paz is, if you're thinking about their government, they have a republic. This is where you're going to find the executive, like the president, and then the legislative branch. So kind of like if you're thinking from the U.S. perspective, that's the House of Representatives as well as the Senate. You also have Sucre, which is your judicial and more of your official capital. Be like if you're thinking about the U.S. government, again, you're thinking about the Supreme Court there. Shifting gears a little bit, the people. Half of the people who live in Bolivia are Native American, and that's where their background lies, whether it's in Incan culture or many of the other native cultures that exist in Bolivia, as well as South America as a whole. 30% of them are mestizos. Mestizos are people who have a combination of a native and European background. There are over 30 languages spoken here. The main one is Spanish, but again, you're going to hear especially a lot of native languages being spoken, and 78% follow Roman Catholicism. Again, former Spanish colony, that influence is seen throughout much of South America as well as Central America as well. A couple of quick things that you might find interesting. The youngest road, is the world's most dangerous road. And part of the reason for that is that it's quite steep. It runs and connects the highlands to the lowlands. There are no guardrails. It's quite narrow. And unfortunately, it does kill people and injure people every year. Shifting gears a little bit, the largest butterfly sanctuary in the world is also in Bolivia. It's known as the Gembe Biocenter, and it's very important for tourism. A lot of people who find butterflies beautiful or are interested in them, a lot of them come to Bolivia just to see that. All right, let's shift gears and talk about Chile next. So the Algarrobo city has the largest swimming pool in the world, and it's not chlorine, it is saltwater. However, it's a length of 1,000 yards, which, if you want to do the math real quick, is 3,000 feet. And it's an area of about 20 acres, and its maximum depth is 115 feet, which means that seawater that it holds, it's about 66 million gallons. So those of you who are enthusiasts of swimming pools and like saltwater, check out Chile. All right. Also, it's about 110 miles wide, so it's a pretty narrow country, but it's long. It's about 2,652 miles. So again, for my U.S. viewers, that's about as wide as the contiguous United States, which is a little over 3,000. 80% of Chile is mountainous. And we're going to talk about, too, how that affects its economy here a little bit later. But that's also going to affect its tourism because it's going to affect the coastline width. Certainly, the Andes dominate Chile. You're going to find over 1,300 volcanoes, and a lot of those are still active. So a lot of geographical and geological change going on in Chile. As a result, very few people live in the Andes on account of those active volcanoes, with the exception, of course, of the Altiplano, which it shares with Bolivia. Another interesting and very unique geographic feature is the Atacama Desert, which is one of the driest places on Earth. In fact, some of the places here in this region have actually never seen or received rain, which is incredible to think about. And it's also believed to be one of the oldest deserts on the planet. So again, a very unique geographical feature for South America, but also the world, especially given the elevation. All right, let's talk about that economy. So it is going to make sense that farming is not going to play as big of a role. However, mining is going to play a massive role in the economy of Chile. About a third of the output of copper from the world comes from Chile. You're also going to have gold, you're going to have silver and iron ore, as well as sodium nitrate, which is the powder that you see on the image here from Chile. Now, just to give you a couple of uses of sodium nitrate, those would include things like preserving meat. You also can see it for chemicals as well as fertilizers. You see it also sometimes in Minnesota, which is where I'm recording right now. It's even used to melt ice off of our sidewalks sometimes. So like we mentioned, given the geography, given the fact that the Andes dominate the landscape here, agriculture accounts for about 13.6% of the labor force. So not as big of a number, especially when we compare that to some of the other nations in South America that we've studied. So when we're looking at those agricultural products, you guys can see things like grapes and apples and pears. You can see onions and wheat and corn, things like oats and peaches, garlic, asparagus, certainly beans, beef, poultry, wool, fish, and timber. So there's a lot of natural resources to be found in Chile. A couple of other things that Chile is well known for. It's actually fairly well known for its wine. It's the 9th largest producer in the world, and a big part of that is the climate and its geography. Those two combine to help provide a lot of opportunity for winemaking in Chile. Surprisingly, but unsurprisingly at the same time, given the movements of salmon, it's the second largest producer of salmon in the world. It's estimated about 38% of the world's salmon come from Chile. But again, remember that salmon aren't always a freshwater fish. They spend most of their lives in saltwater. All right, coming back to Chile's people. The Chileans are predominantly mestizos. So again, we've got a combination of that native background along with a European background. They predominantly speak Spanish, former Spanish colony, and they practice predominantly Roman Catholicism. 80% of this population is urban. That makes a lot of sense given the fact that agriculture doesn't play as big of a role, and of course, that we are in the heart of the Andes Mountains. Santiago, which is its capital, as well as its largest city, it's about 4.8 million people. And in 1888, Chile annexed the Easter Island. And you can see a lot of really fascinating Pacific island culture in the Easter Islands. You might know the Big Heads already. I highly encourage you to go check that out. That was opened up to the public in 1966 as another heritage site for learning about the history of our world. Students, if you are watching along for my class, I highly encourage you to check out this quiz just to see if you're getting the major points. Check out these 6 questions. Check out that challenge question 2. Highly encourage you to, of course, follow along with your guided notes. So make sure that you're getting ready for any upcoming quizzes or tests in my class. If you're following along just to learn, if you want to try it and see how you do, go for it. But certainly this is something that is just there to make sure that you're pulling out those main and those key ideas. I want to thank you for listening. Students in my class, I'm looking forward to diving more into this in class. Those of you who are listening from outside of my class, I appreciate you taking the time, and thank you for joining me. Have a wonderful day.